out.
Yeah, let me check, make sure my microphone's working. Seems to be working. Everybody in the back can hear me?
Yeah, come on in.
How do you like your insides cooked? Medium, medium well? 30 minutes at this temperature sounds about right.
Yeah, it's warm up here, so.
It's better up here than it is over there, though. So
Yeah, maybe the fan kicked in. I don't know. So we wanted to take a little bit. We're going to ask you some questions too about this, and kind of try and keep this as a little free form. We have some slides together. What's that?
You got to use the microphone.
You can't hear me? That's a shock. Oh, really? You can now? Oh, yeah. Is that better? Okay. So we wanted to keep this a little free form. Hopefully ask some questions, get some interaction from you guys. We've done this a lot in terms of replatforming, which is our topic. We want to talk a lot about what it means to move from a Magento 1 site to a Magento 2 site, or even from someplace else onto a Magento 2 site. There's some background about us. I'm the founder of WebScale. We're an e-commerce hosting provider. We have about over 1,000 storefronts under our control, hosted in a variety of platforms, so AWS, GCP, Azure, pretty much every data center, all of them provide globally. We do about 1 billion or plus requests a day that we're handling. It's, many billions in e-commerce. But we've been working with our merchants to move from Magento 1 or from SAP Hybris or other platforms onto Magento 2 and helping them have a successful experience and work through the issues they may encounter. And so I asked TJ to join me in this. Originally, it was me, but that's kind of boring with a hosting provider alone. A lot of the pain is actually felt by TJ up front building the site, and then us collaborating together very strongly helps the merchant have a good experience. Basically, the goal here is to know what's going to happen before you actually have bullets flying and the live site live. So us working together and working closely together is really important. And so anyway, we also want to answer some questions to you guys in that we can pretty much go in any direction. So I'm really curious in the room seeing like who's on Magento 1 and thinking about Magento 2. And all right, and so have you started your projects yet, or are you still working out what are you going to do? Is it mostly just everybody's just new, you're on 1 and you're ready to go to 2, but you're not sure what to do yet? Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. Now, there's another side to this too that, the end of life is coming here, right? So there is a deadline, and it's really important to make this deadline. Security is a very important topic within the Magento community, specifically those security patches that if you're not staying up with security patches, you have a major vulnerability. You're going to have a problem. And part of our goal as a provider is to make sure the Secret Service never shows up, right? So it's important to keep up with that. I think you might have some thoughts about the timing of this, right? So this deadline, and it got moved before. Yeah, I think this is it.
It's going to happen this time, right? And that's always a point of contention with merchants, especially. Nobody wants to feel like they're made to do anything. I mean, hell, I started this business so people couldn't tell me what to do, right? Like, nobody wants to feel like somebody is forcing them into something that's not the right decision for them. And so, there are a lot of merchants out there that are waiting, and they're trying to see, what happens with this end of life, how does it play out? There's a lot of ways this can and probably will go, right? Like, it's not the end of the world, right? It's not like Magento 1 is going to vanish. You're not going to wake up in July of 2020 and Magento 1's just gone and doesn't exist. But you do have additional risk. It's just about risk mitigation. What is your risk tolerance for staying on a platform that is not officially supported, that they are not going to come out with security patches? There'll be community initiatives to support that, but without money behind that, how long do those last, right? How quickly do those respond to any emergencies? Magento is an open source platform, and with that, the bad guys have access to the source code just like the good guys do. And so if and I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm not throwing it out there, but if I found a vulnerability in Magento right now, I'd just sit on it for 6 months, right? Or a year, or, release it right before there's no more support for it. And I assure you, if that happens, Magento will concede and probably support that particular issue. But your time is limited. They have given us enough time. They have let merchants know. And in theory, in theory, you should have been looking to do this for some time. And I know there are special cases. There are merchants where they just launched their site last year on Magento 1 for some reason or other, whether they got bad advice from a partner that, you know, didn't understand Magento 2, didn't know how to do it. So there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, most merchants have had this platform out there for years. They may have, you know, built it in 2008. Their current site may probably 3 or 4 years old, I would say on average at least. And if your site's 3 or 4 years old, it's time for you to be evaluating what your next steps are, regardless of this situation. It's definitely it's one of those things that's going to push the end of Magento 1 faster. But we've been given adequate time. We were giving a timeline. They conceded on that, gave us more time to support it. And so whether you actually make the move before the deadline just depends on your risk tolerance.
Yep. So, and with that, one thing that's very important to understand is that this is not an upgrade. This is not a minor change to Magento. Consider it as fully a re-platform. This is changing from Magento 1 to Magento 2. It is a complete change. I've seen horror stories. I've experienced one horror story where a customer overnight in a maintenance window tried to go to Magento 2 in the early days. It did not go well, I can tell you. So in that, take into consideration the major differences, both from architecturally what's there and what opportunities are really in front of you, because you're making this big switch from a Magento 1 platform to Magento 2, and that you have an opportunity to not just reproduce the decisions that have maybe gotten you over time, where you've gone incremental versions, made minor changes, slow upgrades. I think we'd agree that, I'd consider it a failure if you build a Magento 2 site that looks just like your Magento 1 site. Take this as an opportunity to consider some of your past decisions. We've talked about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, special cases. We have a client right now that's on Magento 1, and they know, fully aware, the end of life's coming, and they're like, we don't care. It's fine, right? We'll deal with it. But their website is a very small part of their business, and it serves a very special purpose. And if they did move to Magento 2, they want it to be exactly what it is on Magento 1. Maybe a little bit of a refresh in the design that provides no real business value to them. But if you're outside of that special use case, you definitely should be reevaluating all of your life choices at this point, right? Everything that has led you to this point, you need to think through. And you also need to pay attention to the fact that most merchants, when they start seeing the cost to move to Magento 2, and they think about what their Magento 1 build costs, and it's Magento 2, for the most part, is probably going to be more expensive. But that's a factor of several things. You typically, especially if you've been on it several years, you typically didn't build what you've got now out of the gate, right? You built it, you iterated on it, you improved it. As they come out with new features, you leverage those. You obviously want to at least have on-par functionality. Most merchants don't want to take a step back, but you don't have to take advantage of everything it can do out of the gate, right? And if you do, you have to understand that the market for Magento development is different than it was 6, 7, 8 years ago. Developers are much more in demand. This is a much more enterprise system than it was back in the day. It's hard to find your third cousin's best friend's neighbor that can do a Magento site these days, and you definitely don't want that risk in your business either. So it's just a different conversation than it was when most merchants moved to Magento 1.
So let's take a step back and look at the challenges. So I have a very different perspective about the challenges associated with a Magento 2 build, and how you know that you're going to have success when you release this thing into the wild than what you guys experience when you're building the site. I think a lot of this, so from the start, it's really around the development and the development timelines and sort of understanding what goes into this project. So first off, we've sort of established it is a major project to switch from a Magento 1 platform or anywhere else really to Magento 2. But given that, so now you have to consider that there is this massive project. You have this hard deadline that's coming where the Magento 1 patches won't be available anymore. And now you're entering into that window of time pressure where you really have to be considering what partners you're working with. And as you make those decisions in terms of where you're going to host it, how you're going to run it, how do you know it's going to work correctly, and then working with your development agency to really make those good decisions about what your platform is going to look like going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's a different landscape. You got to kind of rethink everything, make sure you find good partnerships. It is, I guess, trying to figure out the best way of saying this, but there are a lot of challenges. I just want to make sure I reiterate that this is not an upgrade, okay? This is not an upgrade. This is a different platform by the same name. It's similar. You're going to get in there and you're going to be like, this feels eerily similar, but something's off. You're like in the twilight zone of Magento, right? It's similar, but not exactly the same. But in that, there is opportunity, right? It is different. It is more complicated technically, but that's where the ecosystem is. Like when Magento 1 came out, it was more complicated technically than everything else on the market, which is what made it better than everything else on the market. And Magento 2 is moving that to what an enterprise technical stack should look like these days. But that comes with some complexity, some learning, some understanding from you and your technical resources.
Yeah, I think from my side too. So I typically, on the hosting side, experience a lot with that Magento 2 platform where they come in with their new build. It looks great. Functionally, it's passing their test. But then now they have to consider, well, what are the performance challenges in front of them, and how do we make sure that the site, once we release it into production, is actually going to work? And so we've had to actually, on our side, create some new technology to allow us to take the customer's traffic and take the previous N days worth of traffic and replay it through this system to make sure that we know what performance is going to be long before we ever turn it on live in production, so that we can get a sense for where are the looming errors. And we've learned some things too, where it's one thing to test performance, test checkout, make sure things are working right. It's another thing to do that with crons updating and re-indexing on a test site. And so now when you consider that what we're really trying to do is, it's really important for us to take that environment and make it as close to production as we can, and then replay what happened from the internet from the production account, transformed appropriately for the Magento 2 site, because sometimes the paths, the domains, they're all different. But now we're replaying that traffic through that staging version of the new site to make sure that when we go live, we're not going to have any major surprises or hiccups, right? That's a big piece. I think what we've seen is that out of the gate, you tend to find some performance challenges right off the bat, but usually with strong partnership and effort all around, we can identify where the holes are and fix those things and overcome the problems. And we're actually getting great performance out of the Magento 2 sites that we're working with today. So,
I want to add to that just a little bit, in that this is an opportunity for your business or the merchants you work with to grow up a little bit. It's an opportunity for you to understand what it takes to do proper e-commerce. This is a maturing market. I've been doing this. I built my first e-commerce website in '99. You could do any damn thing you wanted to do in '99 and you would get sales. Anything. Just put a website out there. Doesn't matter if it's secure. Doesn't matter if it's fast. People will buy from you. But now you have to grow up. If you are running a Magento site and you are FTPing your changes up to that site, right? You got to get out of that. But I'm sure nobody here is doing that. But I'm still surprised at how many merchants that's what they're doing. That's what their internal development team's doing. Like, what is version control? I don't, how does this work, right? This is complicated. Is there a staging site? No, we just test on the live site. We just upload some stuff, right. And then it didn't break. So now we just leave and go home for the day.
Or we deploy on a Friday.
Yeah, deploy on a Friday, right? Like this is an education. One of the biggest problems we have in the e-commerce industry is how much education it takes to stay up with how fast this industry's moving. And so, if as developers or as the tech people in this industry, it is our responsibility to try to take that education to the merchants, even if they don't want it, right? And if you're merchants, or if you are a merchant and you don't want it, you don't want to use version control, you don't want a proper staging environment or a testing environment, then perhaps Magento is not the right platform for you, right? Like, you either need to grow up and do enterprise e-commerce if you want to work with enterprise e-commerce software. And when I say enterprise, I'm talking about open source too, right? Open source is an enterprise-grade e-commerce platform. And so you, as a merchant, need to have an enterprise mindset if you're going to do that.
Yeah, I think one thing that folks tend to, especially the merchants, you have to understand that you're building software. You're not just creating a website, you're creating software. And where we're all going, obviously, is to really operate the back end as an API provider and have front-end client software that's making API calls back into the system. That's where this whole model's moving. It's better for performance, it's better, more predictable, and it's a more production mindset, more enterprise mindset in software delivery and how you're operating your website. But then understanding that this is software and you are in the software development model, so the idea that you make live changes on production or don't have source control is really unacceptable. You're just opening yourself up to performance issues, production availability issues, security issues, kind of the list goes on. Ideally, I mean, in your best scenario, your developer doesn't have access necessarily to the production environment. And I have customers in certain industries where that's not allowed. We as a third party have to actually go and manage deployments into the production environment to keep that there's no single person that has access to both the code and the production internet users, so that there's a level of distance there, so that no one person could introduce a vulnerability that would compromise the customer environment. So just thinking of those things. Now that's a pretty extreme use case. That customer in particular is very, very security minded, so they're putting policies and practice into place to ensure that their customers stay safe. Not everybody has that. There's sort of this gradation there in terms of how you manage deployment. But consider that. I mean, it's not just when you think about the opportunity in front of you with Magento 2, it's not just, well, I get to change the functionality or my look and feel. You actually get to change both your development processes as well as how you're managing your site live in production, so that you're moving the ball forward kind of in all dimensions. So yes, you're more functional, more capable, but you're also more secure, more performant. You have more predictability in your availability because you're using best practice in how you build, test, and release into production new code to make sure that your customers stay safe and have a great user experience. So.
Amen.
Yeah, so marketing made a little fun here going forward around the opportunity. I think we've really hammered it in that this is an opportunity. It's not just an upgrade. This is a full re-platform. We've said it a bunch. I hope somewhere in here it resonates, right?
Yeah, you've got to switch your mindset. If you are migrating because you have to, it is going to be miserable, and you are going to hate every minute of it. And so, you have to look at this as an opportunity to improve your business, an opportunity to add some functionality you're missing, to fix some functionality you're not happy with on the website. If you're migrating because somebody made you and somebody set a clock for mid next year, then you're just in for a bad time.
And with that, I mean, part of this too, one of the big practices we see in customers that come on to us, so we're big believers in measuring everything. If you can't measure it, you can't see it, you're probably broken in a way you just don't understand yet. And so as a result of that, this is also an opportunity to understand, well, what is your user experience today? So prior to making the switch, what kind of performance are your users experience? How are they traversing your site? What are they doing in the site? Where are your issues? And then understand that in Magento 2, so now you start to measure those individual, how your system's behaving, and then start to look at, in the Magento 2, set expectations that you want to make the world a better place. You want your site to be more performant, more secure. So being able to interrogate your traffic and understand who's coming to you and what countries they're coming from and what they're doing on your site, so that you can get a sense of what you want and don't want on your site. Because I guarantee most of you have a higher than you'd expect percentage of traffic from automated sources that are doing absolutely no good for your business, but actually slowing down your real users and muddying up your metrics about how your business is operating on conversion rates. So there's an opportunity to address those things as well, not just the individual code side.
And you get a chance to look at the new technologies that are out there, right? Can you look at PWA? Is that something that's right for your business? It's still early, it's still young, but, again, it goes back to your risk tolerance and timing. maybe that is the right move to give you an advantage in the market. Maybe you're on-prem or something and you want to look at cloud hosting, whether it's Magento Cloud or whether it's, hosting with a third party. It's a good opportunity to reevaluate all of those things, integrations with your back office systems that you're afraid to touch because, nobody in the building knows how that thing was written, right? Like they were just some old guys writing COBOL in the closet when that thing was created. So it's a good chance to just reevaluate all of those things and kind of bring them up to modern standards.
Yeah, do you still need that AS400 system?
Exactly. Probably.
Probably.
I know many people who have gone multiple rounds with AS400s and lost.
That's right. Yeah. So what are some best practices? I think we should have some takeaways. We've got a little bit of time left. Well, first of all, hold on. Before we jump into what we might consider as the best thing to go do, how are we doing? Any questions out there so far? I know we've just kind of been rambling, and we can talk forever. So should we keep going?
All right, we're gonna beat y'all up.
Yeah,
for
there's a
questions.
question. I knew there was one.
So we're the poster child for what not to do. Moving from Magento to we have to.
Uh-huh.
We have no intention of upgrading in a way that will, because our owners really look at the ROI of every amount of time spent on something. Is this going to be worth it? Granted, they give us a lot back, a lot of leeway because we're the web guys, so they're smart,
Yeah.
But it seems like it could be an uphill struggle to try to sell, kind of bringing in more B2B features that Magento has, or a bunch of stuff that I've found out that would be actually kind of useful. So I'm not sure what my question is, other than it sounds like we're going to move to Magento 2, but it have to.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a risk, but that's the one we're not going to take.
Yeah, I just told you your next 6 months are about to suck, right? And you're just kind of worried about that.
What he
Just forget, I'm an idiot. Don't worry about that too much. But so what does your business do?
We sell specialty chemicals. A lot of our business is not web-based.
Okay.
A lot of our business that is web-based is
Is what?
B2C?
B2C. Okay.
All right.
So people go online and they buy chemicals for their own personal use, like bomb making, or what are we?
hopefully great. No, silicones, epoxies, and
Oh.
urethane.
Okay.
There tends to be a lot of mold making, hobbyists, and cosplay that
So you're
I
selling
see.
like gallons or small containers or something like that?
Yeah,
5 gallons.
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So are you doing any B2B at all right now? Like even offline?
Oh yeah, tons.
Okay.
It's all old school.
So it's old school phone calling. So the fact that you could throw up a
Yeah.
multi-site, you could do B2B,
Right.
you could set up a PWA for your reps to go out in the field and take those orders and everything, doesn't excite the owners at all? Okay.
Oh, all right.
But that's
This
an
is ammo
opportunity,
to go
right?
back with. That
Like,
it's
you know,
not
you-
just a.
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that it has, corporate accounts and, it's already got credit lines built in and you've got negotiated prices and product exclusivity if you deal with any of that stuff out of the box, you got requisition lists and quick orders and all of that nonsense that will just be there, right? It'll just be there. Now, PWA is obviously a different thing. We can have that conversation. It's a little longer conversation, but if you can set that up as, a lot of our business is B2B, and this allows us not to cut out our sales guys, right? You can't think of it as that, because then your sales guys have to be your champion of your
Yeah.
B2B product, and if they're afraid they're losing deals because of it, then it's not going to work, right? But what it does is free up their time to better service your bigger accounts or to spend more time going after more accounts. And then you have this whole self-help option, which allows you with the same amount of resources to go out there and try to get more business. So it's, Magento 2 is a huge opportunity for you.
Yeah.
I see it that way. I see some crimps in my enthusiasm. I'll take it back.
It's tough, right? The guy who writes the check is always a little grouchy. Like, I understand that, right? But if they can see this if you could flip that as this is an opportunity, and it may be a baby step toward that opportunity. Don't bite off more than you can chew, right? You've got a deadline. One of the takeaways is start early, start now. You don't have to start building the site now, but you better start planning now. You better start thinking it through. And so, redo that site as M2, but then you're sitting there with an M2 base. But know that that is your vision, that is where you want to go, so that you make the right decisions now to set you up for that, so you're not redoing or rethinking something later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. That was a great question. Rambling. Yeah. In the back.
Where am I from? Well, I own Jamerson, an agency, and we are strategically located in the middle of nowhere in beautiful Opelika, Alabama. There you go. It's very similar, very similar. Alabama accent's a little different, but I try to take the edge off for you folks here, right? I get back home, it can get a little thick.
I do have a question.
Okay, great. Yeah.
On that.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of replatforming to M2 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing it in phases like you have to with deployments and I'm a little worried because I come from like an SEO and search background.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously using you, we're going to be having, what are they called? Not simple products, but
Configurable?
configurable.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations for configurable products and customers learning to deal with that and how to interact with the site?
You want me to take this one?
Yeah,
too?
yeah.
Okay.
This is all you, man.
What kind of products are you selling?
We sell battery-powered lawn and garden tools.
Okay, that's cool. Ought to be a nice niche to be in these days. So what is your concern with clients using configurable products? Like configurable products are pretty much what the web's built on. Like and for those that may not know, if you go to a website and you're buying a shirt, like this shirt here that I was supposed to have my jacket on so I look all businessy, but it's hot
hot.
in here, so I'm all casual. But you offer the shirt in different sizes, different colors, and in Magento, each different attribute combination is a simple product. So this shirt in small, in blue, is a product, and then large in blue is a product, and then large in red is a product, right? All those are products. And what you do is you create a configurable product that groups all those together, so that when your merchant or when your customer comes to the website and they hit that page, they have drop down. So they can say, I want the blue one, and I want the medium one, and then they add it to their cart. So it's just options for them, really. So I'm not sure I understand what your concern is with your customers understanding that. Like they go and they say, I want the 12-volt system, or I want the extra battery capacity. Like that's just how the internet works, so customers should understand that inherently.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think it sounded like you were concerned, from an SEO standpoint, the transformation of the URLs and being re-indexed by the search engine so that these paths have all changed. And, I see it from my perspective where customers show up with, here's my 50,000 URL transformations, which is every way you could have ever requested this product ever on the internet, so that they're all valid pathways. We do that for you, so depending on how paranoid, there's in the proxy layer, you should be able to address that, essentially provide those transformations. One of the things we're interested in, because that whole measure everything and track it, is make sure that proxy service is able to track how often those various transformations of URLs are actually referenced from the internet and by what bots. And so don't just carry along an htaccess file that's 100 megs because you think you need to have every reference ever for some product on your site. Actually measure how often it's being used and how often Google's picking it up. Google and Bing especially, set your crawl delay for Bing. That's just sort of my generic Bing. They're all over your site and hammering you. You can tell them, they will listen to slow down. But in terms of just measure what they're doing and then make sure that you're responsive there. So you're not just, a lot of people will have these unquestioned beliefs about how, I have to have all this stuff around, and then they're not measuring to see if it's really having an impact. Or if no one from the internet's making those requests, it doesn't matter if you have those requests available, if that makes sense, from my perspective.
I missed the SEO aspect of that question, I guess.
There's a lot of layers. Our products vary in like $100, whether it's
Okay.
for the battery or not.
Right?
Sure.
And we are a DR-based business.
Okay.
It starts with 30-minute infomercials, 5-minute infomercials.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And our demographic is older.
Okay.
They don't accept change as
Oh, sure.
savvy on it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of my whole concern.
Yeah, like, I mean, what platform are you on now?
M1.
M1? Okay, and so you have an SEO concern moving to configurable products because you're not using them now?
Well, we're going to use Firebear to be able to append the URL.
Okay.
So that I can have a unique URL for each one. But SEO is a major component for us as a company. Like that's how
Organic
we
search
have
is,
to buy a battery trimmer. We have
Right.
to find them somehow.
yeah, sure.
Usually through SEO or and that's what my big concern is. If anything that's React or Vue or anything, how SEO is going to play into that. How can I index each of those products?
Understand. Yeah, I mean, that is a very technical question. I would have to see your product data a little more to give you the right answer there. It depends on how many options and complicated things get as to whether or not, as to what the right answer is for that. But, happy to talk about it more sometime. I think we're pushing our time. We're supposed to be 30
Was this
minutes.
30 minutes?
It's 30 minutes, yeah, but there's actually a 30-minute break after, so
We
you
got
guys
all day. More questions, more questions.
Yeah, we're happy if there's more questions, answer questions. It's not rude to get up and go if you're sweating too much.
How long has the replatforming from M1 to 2 been taking on average? I mean, I know it's a loaded question.
That is a very, on average, is
There
interesting, right?
My perspective, there is no good distribution to model that. We've seen relatively fast, and you probably like your normal, and then we've seen the exceptional circumstances where things go wrong, and then everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong, including a hurricane showed up at one point, that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I'd say it's all over the map, and it's probably more driven by you and project management and making sure that you have realistic timelines and you stay on it and you don't bite off too much. You actually know how you're going to phase your project to get success.
It
But yeah.
depends on how far to heart you took that reevaluate everything,
Yeah.
right? And if you're, if it's completely new design or you're rebranding or you're adding a bunch of things you're not familiar with, it takes longer. I'm not sure if the numbers changed, but a year ago or so, it was the average Magento site's a 4-month build, right? Now that's not necessarily 4 months of full development, but from planning to implementation, that's average. But what does that mean? Like nobody's average, right? So it's, could be a couple of months, could be 2 years. It just depends on how crazy your implementation is. Anybody else? 8 months.
Yeah.
Are you done with it?
No, we are going to February.
So maybe 8 months.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah. Hers is potentially 8 months.
Potentially, it
Somebody
might be 8
told
months,
her.
that's right.
Somebody told her it was going to be 8 months. See how that goes. Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, right.
Are you excited by AWA coming? And if you are, what's the perfect business case and the time of merchant?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. Of course, I'm easily excitable, so I'm not going to, necessarily say that that's a strong indicator of anything. But yeah, PWA, for those that I'm sure everybody knows, unless you've been living under a rock or at least heard the term progressive web app. Progressive web is the next iteration of what the internet will be. And so, it's always concerning when you start getting the buzz and the marketing hype behind a technology, because a technology is not a business strategy. A technology is not something that's going to bring you more sales without any sort of strategy or push or usefulness behind it. But as far as technologies go, PWA is very exciting. It basically, and the thing is right now, most people are just moving existing thought out UX in the old style of building websites to the progressive web. And they kind of look the same, and maybe they act a little better and they're a little faster. But this opens up the capabilities of so much more user experience stuff, right? Like there's so much more you can do. And I think we're still years away from seeing creative people really push the boundaries of what a PWA can do. As far as business case right now, PWA Studio's great. You've got Vue Storefront, Deity Falcon, I don't know if they're here, different technologies you can build a PWA in. A PWA basically is just, for all intents and purposes, it's really just a JavaScript front end that connects to your website to pull all the data and send the orders through, right? That's just a layman's explanation. I know somebody will technically nail me on some of that or something, but, and so, right now though, the technologies are still pretty new. There's compromises with every direction you go. And so that tooling is still being built out at a rapid pace, but it's still being built out. So you need to have a little bit of risk tolerance or budget tolerance for problems that may come up. The merchants that we talk to that I'm advising on PWA have fairly simple needs, right? If you're doing something extremely complicated or you have just this crazy experience you want to do, then, we need to make sure your budget adequately handles that. So, if a merchant has very basic needs, they're pretty in the box. Like they're okay with using, if we're going to go PWA Studio, they're okay with using Braintree because that's already written and we don't have to write the payment module because, their payment provider hasn't fixed it yet, right? And they're going to go with, Vertex tax in the core Magento. We don't really have to worry about that. Their user experience is fairly standard, but maybe they want the ability to add it to the home screen. They want to eventually go add push notifications or something. Those cases are really the ones we're pushing now to say, okay, you can go ahead and do this. But if you're very, very budget conscious, if you're very, very deadline conscious, then maybe it's just not the right time. And that's another thing that kind of complicates with the M1 end of life, is that I would strongly urge you to look into PWA. If you're launching right now, well, 3 years from now, you're going to be 2 years behind everybody with PWA. And that's really one of the factors that complicates this migration for me, because I want to tell everybody, this is a great opportunity to redo as a PWA. But for most merchants, it's probably Q1, Q2 next year before I am comfortable saying that the tooling is there for us to be able to estimate and not have significant risk in that project.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Simple follow-up to Herb and Sales return. When we switched to Magento, we ended up, with 10,000 redirects from the ASP does the directory, these things change from product page have the same URL and two. So the category page is the same URL.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question there. Did you?
Yeah, I think
You gotta yell at us.
He's
We got a
basically
fan or
saying,
something.
how big is the transformation in URL space from Magento 1 to Magento 2? Is he going to have another 10,000 line HT-access to handle redirects for, if he, yeah.
I mean, there's some very smart people in here from Adobe and stuff. I don't think is there any structure change? I think you can have the exact same URLs. I'm under the understanding that you can have the exact same URL structure. I believe so. I mean, we've done quite a few launches. That hasn't been a problem. So it hasn't been a problem, which means it shouldn't exist, right? So it should be the same.
The only transformations we've seen where a customer wanted a different URL space, so they enforced that, but there was no, yeah.
You'll have to keep the list you had before if you still want those to redirect them.
Right. But you should also measure how often they're being used too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Something that ages them out
right.
over time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions or?
We got 20 more minutes here. We can answer
In break
questions.
time, yeah.
We're
going
gonna
to have it instead.
We're gonna get well done, not medium well.
That's
So
right.
that's
medium
good.
well at the moment, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
let's
yeah,
go
we
through
can.
those.
I
I
guess
don't
we're
know. We got
just wandering
sidetracked
around.
on questions.
Yeah, right.
They're there. You read them.
Yeah, I mean, around improving your site performance, I mean, that really comes back to measuring. So if you don't know what your average user experience is, and that's actually, it's a tricky one to measure. You shouldn't, if you're just looking in Google Analytics and saying my page load time is X today, you're not doing what I'm talking about. You really care about not just any individual page or how a customer, like your homepage is fast, everybody's homepage is fast. It's that random product that somebody interacts with, and then what is their life cycle through the site. And so what we'll do to actually measure an average site performance is turn it into a probability distribution of the likelihood that any customer is going to visit any one page within the site, and what was the average measured performance for those pages, and then create the weighted, adjusted, average site, sort of average user experience. When you construct that and then you measure that over time, it's actually reflecting who used what on your site today and what that user experience was, and then how did it change over time. And then it's very important to measure and track that data over time, so as you make changes, so somebody, it's a code upload, or, in the 2.2 where we saw the deployments breaking turning off full page cache and never turning it back on again. So monitoring that from a daily basis so that you understand how your user experience changes as marketing injects new pixels and, the site, everything that's happening within the site. So you want to track that and track it over time so that you can get on things before they become a major problem. You don't want to wait 3 months and discover, oh my God, my site's slow. So actually having that and setting up the appropriate alerting and understanding what performance is and how your performance is evolving over time. And then also, by the way, don't tell me to make it as fast as possible. That you actually set a reasonable performance goal. So where are you today? So you have to be able to measure it so you know what you're doing today, and then come up with what are the things you can actually take into consideration and adjust to improve your performance over time. So there's no real silver bullet. It's really unless occasionally, somebody really breaks something, you could fix that. But beyond that, it's actually understanding what the impacts of the decisions you're making are on the performance that you're getting out of your site, measuring that, and then when you make a change, measure the change and the impact of that change on your user experience. And then don't be very reactionary. It's letting it burn in over time and measure over time and understand that I just made this change. Now, tomorrow, what was my experience for that day? 24 hours is a pretty good period to understand how customers are experiencing that, and then measure and see, how was it, and then now make your next change. And doing that, it is kind of this one thing at a time. You make a lot of changes simultaneously unless you're doing work to divide your cohorts and, A/B test different performance changes on different groups of people. It's very hard. That's actually a very sophisticated way to get to multiple performance experiences simultaneously. It can be done, but it's challenging too. So start with that, measure everything, and then make those iterative changes over time. So.
Yeah, as far as, audit plugins, APIs, there's the second bullet. I'll cover those first two, right? Start early, start now. We talked on
We
that.
did that, yeah.
That's pretty simple. Audit plugins, a good Magento site, a happy Magento site is a simple Magento site. Do not add plugins just for fun. Do not sit there and just say, I want these plugins because they look nice.
I might need them someday.
Right. So, usually M1, you've had it for years. You've got plugins in there. You were testing, evaluating. Maybe you're using them. Maybe you're not. Maybe in Magento 2, that's in the core. Maybe there's a better way of doing that. Maybe you don't actually need it. So be sure to go through and audit everything you're doing. Maybe you're using an old web shop apps plugin that they wrote for Magento 1, and now it's time to go full Shipper HQ, which is what that evolved into. So it's, it's definitely a good opportunity to reevaluate every decision that was made on your current site and make sure you understand why. Because lots of times people come, people go, you don't even understand why that feature's in there. It's just in there. Like, why is it there? I don't know. Why is the sky blue? Just is, right? So look into that. Make sure that everything you're migrating over has a purpose.
So let's see the
rest of those are yours. Yeah, improve your site performance. The rest of those are hosting. I'm just going to sit down.
Yeah, so the 100% uptime, this is again back to measuring. So not just, uptime is one of those things that you want to be measuring sort of what the internet is experienced for you. So there's synthetic benchmarks. So you've got, your Pingdom or somebody like that just synthetically probing your site on a regular basis, making sure that DNS is working and everything involved from customer browser through your site is working. And then also ensuring that you've got the auto scaling baked in so that when you get hit with some new bot, Quant was the one the other day, shows up and starts hammering your site, you know what's going on, and you can actually, one, identify it and get rid of it, but actually understand where the source of pain is so that you can get it corrected before it starts impacting your customer user experience. And then, obviously paying attention to your cloud provider that you're working with. Hopefully you're not in your own data center, but you're actually buying the data center as a service effectively from Google or Amazon, folks that are pros at delivering that infrastructure, and then working with a partner to make sure that that's being used as efficiently as possible, and that the site is, everything about the site is monitored and then delivered from multi-availability zones, so that if an infrastructure problem occurs, the site can recover from it without major outage. And then beyond that, I mean, I think now we're both feeling it pretty hard. This is silly season. You guys are all changing everything all the time in preparation for Black Friday. People break things. That's the biggest source of change. That's the primary, probably the number one source of availability problems is people. So, you know, just understanding what you're doing, when you're doing it, and, you know, being sure that you're being careful and you have staging and you're using good best practice when you're building new changes to the site and rolling them into production. You know what's going to happen before it happens. Let's see, what was that? Oh, and the cybersecurity practice is a big deal. This is something that I spend a significant amount of my time on, both from our standpoint, creating security audits that go from start to finish, so understanding what's happening from inside the database, inside the production apps themselves, what the traffic that you're getting is and how you're processing, and are all the controls put in place. You're using CSP effectively from an environment where the bad guy can't get access to, so if they compromise the apps server, you should still be able to enforce CSP, so they inject your stored cross-site scripting through JavaScript in your database. You're catching it at the proxy before it ever goes back out to that end customer on the internet, so that you don't ever have the Secret Service show up at your front door. So having that robust practice, reviewing security on an ongoing, regular basis, making sure you're doing everything you can to monitor and detect problems before they become actual customer issues or, you know, fraud issues. Oh yeah, certainly evaluate your hosting options. I mean,
Definitely.
be sure, and don't discount the partnership between the developer and the host. It's very important when something's going wrong that they're working very effectively together, right? Because something's going to come up, and it doesn't matter whether one of your admins deleted all your customers. That's happened. If they're working together, we can do, you know, we're much stronger than the sum of our parts here. So that we're actually constructively looking at all avenues, whether it's a code issue or an infrastructure issue or admin did something that they shouldn't have done. If we're working effectively as a team, then you're actually going to have a much better experience. You're going to have much better uptime performance. It will be a safer site in balance. So.
Yeah, you know, when people are evaluating hosts, it's tough. It's like, you know, which host is best for me? And so don't evaluate somebody that can provide hosting, right? If you look and you've got several options that provide what you want cloud hosting, here are your options. Find somebody that will help you solve problems. It is amazing how much free work those people will put in. You know, you're paying them for a hosting plan, but not really. You got to switch your mindset. You're paying them to help you solve problems. Everybody provides a hosting plan that's in hosting. And it's the ones that will take those extra steps and go the extra mile to help support you when you're, you know, in need, when you're having problems, or even that next step down there when you're getting that host involved earlier, right? You shouldn't come to your host when you're having Black Friday problems. You should have came to your host now and said, we're going to have Black Friday problems, and let's make sure we don't. You know,
what do I have to do to prove that I'm going to be okay when Black Friday comes? And so it's about being effective, you know, being able to take that traffic, replay at the volumes that are anticipated or multiples of anticipation, so that you know that your infrastructure is capable of handling whatever the market's going to throw at it.
There's a reason it's called a hosting partner or development partner, right? Like they're supposed to be there to help you. And if you're not having those conversations, if you're not engaging with their expertise, then you either need to do so or you need to find somebody else.
And it should be beyond just the ticketing system, right? So it's not that you have a problem, you open a ticket, and they give you an answer and whatever. There should be this open communication channel. We use Slack pretty effectively with our customers. Definitely during onboarding, our enterprise customers stay on with that. So it's an open conversation. So when you have any question that comes up about your infrastructure and what we can do to help, and we have that conversation and help you find the answer. You know, sometimes if it's a direct ask for work, we'll direct you back to the ticketing system so we're measurable. But mostly, I mean, it's an open conversation to make sure that you're getting your needs met, and whatever problem's happening, it's getting addressed. So.
We got 10 minutes before they kick us out of here. if
Yeah,
anybody
right.
has any other
I'm sweating
questions.
pretty good.
We're already way over our time, but we don't care.
Yeah. Any other questions? I mean, I think we covered them all now, so
Any
thanks for
questions?
that.
Anybody?
Anybody?
No?
Have we cooked you? Yeah. So. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate the time. And, yep.